The first time I preached, in my curacy, a bat fell dead from the ceiling of the church.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Okay.
That's perfect. Okay, welcome. I'm Alex Holloway.
I'm Allie Melencon.
And you are welcome to Steal My Sermon. Okay, so let's dive on in. Today we're talking about the readings for Sunday, October 24th, which will be Proper 25 Year B.
Yes.
And we are talking about Track 2. Allie, tell us quickly where you are, who you are, where you are.
All right. Yeah. Well, I was recently ordained this summer to the transitional diaconate, and now I'm serving my curacy in San Antonio at St. Thomas Episcopal Church and School. So
Awesome.
that's what I'm doing, and I've been there like a month.
Cool.
Yeah, a month and a week.
Okay.
5
Awesome.
weeks. Yeah, there you
Pretty
go.
new.
Pretty new, fresh.
So you've preached there once so far.
Once.
Okay.
Yeah, the last time
Yeah.
you did this. So
Cool.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. My question is, because for those who don't know, Allie was a college missioner for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel a difference, like preaching in a collar versus all the years that you've preached as a layperson, or like, does it feel just totally the same?
It feels the same, actually. Like it's not more intimidating or less intimidating. It just feels like it's a different audience, right? Like college kids or I don't know, like the other week I preached about Game of Thrones, and I don't think anyone, I just referenced it, I didn't preach about it, I just like referenced Game of Thrones and the story of Esther, nothing.
Crickets.
Like, no one. I'm like, okay,
I did
wrong crowd.
I did a Michael Scott quote from The Office once.
Oh.
One person, one youth in the
Mhm.
crowd, this was in Seguin, laughed, and then the rest was just like puzzled silence. It did not. But then that was kind of perfect because that's how everything from The Office lands, you know? So it was like, it kind of worked, but
Yeah.
I feel your pain.
So yeah, I think that's probably the difference.
Yeah.
Is my humor, I don't know, humor.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not as appreciated as much.
Yeah.
I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, it might take them time to get your sense of humor.
Yeah, it's still too early to tell.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, great. So let's talk first about the gospel.
Okay.
Mark 10:46 through 52. Look it up here. Yeah, why don't we just dive on in? Did anything in particular jump out at you about this passage?
I think this time the thing that stood out to me was the people in the crowd telling the blind man to be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
And like I hadn't really picked up on that before.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this time that was more. And then also wondering like, who is the crowd?
Yeah.
That was like probably me, right? Like
Right.
So
yeah, I know that was an interesting question that one of the commentaries I read raised. Like, is the crowd his disciples and kind of the people who have been following him the whole time, or is this just people who come to see a miracle?
Yeah.
And then that, it's kind of interesting to think about that. But it them telling Bartimaeus to be quiet is similar to what they've just done with the children. You know,
Right.
When people are trying to bring children and they're like, get those kids away, it's too important.
Yeah.
And that's just a common theme for Jesus, is like to stop and actually pay attention to the people that the crowd are trying to hush.
Right. Well, and like also this is like the end of Mark 10, right? I mean, like we've been this whole month have been looking at Mark 10, so it's like, oh, okay, this is how it ends, which is also kind of interesting.
It is.
You're like, oh, this is an interesting place to end this chapter.
Yeah, and this is the last healing in Mark, which I didn't realize, because right after this, Jesus goes into Jerusalem. After this is the triumphant entry. And so everything from this point on is like, focused on the cross and getting there. So I thought that was interesting that the last sort of normal thing Jesus does is heal someone.
Yeah. It's cool. And not just anyone, right? Like someone who's like on the outside, on the margins.
Right. Exactly.
I don't know. That's always. I mean, Jesus does that all the time, right? But it's like, it's enough in Scripture where you're like, maybe we should really be paying attention to that.
Yeah,
you're like
repetition is the key to learning for us thick-skulled people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's the part too that I I wonder about myself, like, who are the people that, you know, we silence in the church, or that, like, we're embarrassed by. Like, I kind of get the sense that, like, he's like the guy who shows up that you hope doesn't show up to the party, you know, or to the family barbecue, or, like, whatever, right? Like, whatever kind of that open invitation is, but you're hoping that, like, weird cousin doesn't come.
Yeah,
like, he's that guy, you know? And then you're like, and there's just no telling what he's gonna say.
Right. Here he is hollering out for Jesus.
Yeah, and you're like, what is that guy? Like,
yeah.
And then
Jesus
you're kind of,
those people.
Exactly. And you're kind of mad at the other cousin who drove him, you know? You're like, someone had to get him here, right? You know, like, that's on you.
Yeah.
And whatever, right?
Right.
So, I don't know, that was, so then I kind of had to, like, check myself, because, you know, this guy just he's there, and he's, like, he's calling out to Jesus, and making a scene, you know? Not one that everyone else is too pleased about. And
exactly. Yeah, that was one of the things I picked up on, was his persistence, that, you know, even after people tell him to be quiet, which I would find, you know, kind of embarrassing, or might stop me, he continues to cry out for Jesus, and he doesn't really even know where he is necessarily. He's just, like, yelling out for him. And it reminded me of, I mean, a million examples in the Gospels where Jesus rewards persistence. You know, like the parable of the persistent widow, that, you know, anyone who continues to seek God finds God, you know, that something about that works. I went down kind of an interesting path because I was thinking, this is a story about the healing of a blind person. How can we read this as non-blind people, you know, and kind of being interested in hearing someone else's perspective on that. And so I found an article from the BBC News, someone named Damon Rose. And he is a journalist for the BBC, and he's blind himself. And this article was about how annoying he finds it when people will randomly pray over him. Like, he'll be on the subway trying to go to work, and someone lays hands on him and prays for his healing, and he's like, I'm fine, you know, like, I have a job, I have a life, like, stop. And he himself is not a Christian, but he became interested in what, like, disabled Christians think about this. So he talked to this woman named Lyndall Bywater, who's a Christian who writes and teaches about prayer. I think she's like a spiritual director. And she is blind. And so I have a quote I wanted to read from that, I thought, and I'll put this up on the screen as well. So Lyndall Bywater says it's important to understand the historical context of Jesus' healing miracles. While disabled people today might bristle at the pity Jesus feels for the people he heals, Ms. Bywater says Jesus was operating at a time when being disabled meant being poor, unemployed, and excluded from mainstream society. She says Jesus did heal physical illness a lot, and I think that some of that was because it did restore people to social dignity at the time. So I thought that was really helpful, that, as usual with the healings that Jesus gives, it's not just about a physical illness, it's spiritual, social, you know, it's when Jesus heals someone of leprosy or bleeding, he's also restoring them into the religious community and into their families. And I thought that was a helpful context, because I know sometimes, or I'm learning, I guess I would say, that the way disability is portrayed in biblical interpretation can sometimes be ableist or problematic. So I thought that it was an interesting article, and I'll link it on the video as well, because it kind of just opened my eyes to different ways of reading about healings, which I thought was sort of cool.
That's interesting, because I was just listening to a friend of mine sent me a podcast of Kate Bowler. She like wrote a book. Her book just came out, and she was interviewing Greg Boyle, Father Greg Boyle. It's like Homeboy Industries. You and I love him. That guy, he's so great. And so back in February they were doing this. She interviewed him, and he has a book coming out this week, I think. So check it out.
Excited.
Yeah, on tenderness. But anyways, I digress. But he was talking about, you know, his work with rehabilitating gang members, and he talks a lot about kinship, and he talks a lot about what does it mean to be to like for these gang members to be, you know, sort of in these in these rival gangs to now be working alongside each other, and how through that they find this kinship. And so she asked him, you talk a lot about kinship, and he talked about, for the way he understands the kingdom of God is that that we are all in relation with one another. And I think what you're talking about with this article from the BBC is that what Jesus does for the blind man is not only does he heal him, but he's able to restore him into community, like into this kinship, into this kingdom with with these people. But I think the other thing is, and Greg Boyle would also agree, like, we don't go places to like save people, right? We go places to be transformed. And that's one of the beautiful parts about this Gospel of Mark, is like Jesus uses the crowd to call the blind man to him. He says, call him over here. And so it's the crowd that says, hey, get up, Jesus is calling you, isn't this great? Right after they're like, hey, shut up, like, don't say anything, gosh, talking out both sides of their mouth. But he restores them as well. And so I think it's this beautiful image of kind of what Greg Boyle's talking about.
Like, the line that probably most stood out to me in this was when Jesus says, so they bring Bartimaeus and he says, what do you want? And I love that. Like, it gives me chills to think about, because he doesn't, Jesus doesn't just assume he knows what this guy wants. Right. And he gives Bartimaeus the chance to name his own need, to say what it is he wants. And it reminded me of the story when the friends bring the paralytic man through the roof, which is the best. And Jesus says your sins are forgiven, and everyone's like, "What the hell? Like,
what did he do?"
Like, why would you forgive his sins? And clearly this guy needs physical healing, and Jesus is like, "Okay, fine, I'll give him physical healing too." But what I love about those two stories is, like, Jesus understands that we're, like, our embodiment is absolutely who we are and very important, but it's also not all of who we are. And there very well could be something else in someone's life that's much more pressing than the fact that they're blind or paralyzed or whatever it is.
But that's what he wanted. It was like a desperate desire. And like, he knew exactly what he wanted, and it wasn't this like vague sort of wishful, sentimental sort of. I think we get caught up in that a lot these days, like, what will be, and you're like, no, this guy knew exactly what he wanted. And I think that's a helpful call to us, what is it that we want?
Right.
I mean, there's so many things that you could have said, and I think sometimes this is also a good passage for us to think deeply about what is it that we want, because most of the time we're just like, I'm in a mess. And that seems to be that seems like the main task of prayer, is to go before God and be like, what do I want? And I think that can lead us deeper and deeper into reality, because what we want may not be good, but if we can bring that before God, then we can get down to what it is we actually want, So good.
It's good stuff. That reminds me too about the Jesus prayer. I don't know if you are familiar with Son of God, or what is it? Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Sometimes called the prayer of the heart.
Okay.
Popular, or not popular, but traditionally used in the Orthodox Church. But the basis of that comes from two stories. This one and in Luke 18, when the Pharisee and the tax collector are both praying in the temple, and the Pharisee's like, thank God I'm not like these people who, are terrible. And then the tax collector is like beating his breast and saying, Lord, have mercy on me. And Jesus is like, he's praying correctly. So I was thinking about that, and how that prayer, in my very limited experience with it, is that it brings you directly to where you need to be in Jesus' presence, which is asking for mercy, and not to say that, like, our vision of Jesus or God is like, big, angry, wrathful, and so we must beg for mercy, but that when you come into the presence of holiness, you know your own difference from that, you know,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
wow, I am human, I'm mortal, I'm limited. So I really liked that. I think Bartimaeus exemplifies that sort of posture of humility, that he's coming saying like, look, I've got nothing, you know, he's just crying out, have mercy on me.
Yeah.
And you could compare that to all the Pharisees and scribes who have been in the last several chapters, you know, coming to Jesus thinking they're awesome and they know all the answers and trying to trick Jesus, and they might be in the presence of Jesus, but they are so blinded by their own arrogance and wisdom and knowledge, whatever, that they can't actually just receive Jesus himself like Bartimaeus can.
Yeah.
It brings in a cool sort of irony that the outcast, the beggar on the side of the road who's blind, is the only one who is getting it. You know, who sees who Jesus is, who, you know, he's only the second person in the Gospels to call Jesus, or to recognize Jesus as the Messiah.
Right.
Only Peter has so far. So while these, you know, learned men can't see it, the blind person can see it. So there's a cool kind of irony there.
Yeah. Yeah. I love pointing out mercy. One of the things that stood out for me in this gospel, and I guess can we touch a little bit on the epistle reading? Okay. So in Hebrews, which is the epistle reading for this Sunday, he let's see, talks about that unlike the high priest, Jesus has no need to offer sacrifices day after day. Just this idea of like sacrifice and mercy. So sacrifice talked about in our epistle reading, and then mercy, sort of Bartimaeus crying out like, Lord, have mercy on me. And just this and sort of that connection to, there's this beautiful line in Hosea 6:6, and I'm probably gonna have to look it up.
I think,
or is it? It says, I desire mercy, not sacrifices. Right. This idea that, and it's also echoed. Also, you're talking about tax collectors. It's also echoed in Matthew 9 when Jesus comes to Matthew, right, and he's in the tax collector's booth, and he's like, "Hey, come to dinner with me," and he goes to dinner with Jesus along with a bunch of other tax collectors and sinners, and the Pharisees are asking Jesus' disciples, like, "Teacher, why are you hanging out with all these like no good guys? You know, all these low lifes?" And Jesus, that's when he says, a physician doesn't come to heal well people; he comes for the sick. And then he says, "Go find out what this means." And he quotes this line from Hosea, and it's like, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And I just love that image of what our readings for this Sunday are like calling us to. It's just this.
One other thing I picked up on from my Bible commentary was that Bartimaeus is being called as a disciple. I think it says the word "call" 3 times in the short passage. Jesus says, "Call him here." And then Bartimaeus throws off his cloak and run. You know, I don't think it says he runs. He sprang up and came to Jesus. And to me, that reminded me of the disciples dropping their nets. You know, like he's throwing his cloak, they dropped their nets, and just that total surrender of like, I'm leaving behind everything I have to follow you. And then Bartimaeus does follow Jesus at the end, which is cool. And something I read too is it was unusual for the person being healed to be named. Like in any of the Gospels, we don't usually know their name. And some scholars think that means that Bartimaeus, and probably his father Timaeus, because he's mentioned too, were like members of the church. Like that they really were, you know, active disciples, which is kind of cool. And their name.
Also in this commentary, he talks about that he was immediate and eager, and he sort of seized the moment, right? Yeah. And I'm like, when I read that, I thought, oh man, I'm like probably patient to a fault, you know? Like I'll just like, I'm gonna think about that. I'm gonna just give that some time. Right. I'm gonna wait this one out, you know? And like, I wonder how often we miss those moments because, you know, we don't want to maybe be eager. I don't know. Sometimes that's seen as like a bad thing, you know. It's like
right. Yeah.
That doesn't seem like a very like a godly virtue to be eager, you know. Be patient,
Right.
you know.
True. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So I thought about that too. I was like, oh man, maybe I'm too patient, or maybe I'm yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen that a lot in Mark, because, you know, Mark uses the word immediately all the time. Everything's happening right then in Mark, and there is that sense of, like, the train's moving, get on, or you'll be left behind, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of scary and exciting.
Yeah. Barclay, the commentary that I read, he said that these three things are, like, sort of a summary and steps to discipleship. And, like, so I guess if you wanted to preach a sermon on discipleship, you know, he starts with a need, right? And then he went to gratitude, and then sort of he's following Jesus, and so into loyalty. And I thought, oh,
That's
just
cool.
throw that out there in case you're...
Say that again.
So it's, he began with the need, and then he went to gratitude, you know, first sight, and then he was loyal in that he followed Jesus.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
I like that. That could be a neat little sermon right there.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're done.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So, Allie,
Yes.
what are you going to preach on?
Okay, well so, as you know, it's like stewardship season, and
Yes.
so at St. Thomas, it's very much stewardship season, and so I have to figure out a way to tie all of this into some sort of a stewardship sermon, which probably won't be too hard, right? I mean, I think Jesus is calling us, you know, to be, you know, this will not be the theme, but to be all in, right? To give all of ourselves over, and to expect that and that Jesus is gonna show up and do something, right? To live in a way in which we're dependent on a God who can be trusted, and a God who heals, and a God who, you know, that we are sort of waiting expectantly for to show up in our midst. And I think somehow tying that into stewardship. So like so at St. Thomas, our theme this year is grounded in faith, growing to serve. And so I've been tasked with the grounded in faith part, which I think is a really beautiful, which won't be hard to do with this passage, right?
Right.
Your faith has healed you.
Exactly. And just the stunning faith that Bartimaeus has, that he knows that Jesus is the Son of God and will heal him.
Yeah. So that's really not a great answer.
No,
that's kind of where I'm headed.
Yeah, and I think, like we mentioned, a lot of people are going to be in that same boat of preaching stewardship right now, and I do think this works well for a stewardship sermon. And even, you know, like we talked about Bartimaeus throwing his cloak off and springing up, like that, all in, like you said, just sort of like, okay, if you're all in, then you put your money where your mouth is. That's part of what it means to be a disciple.
One of the things I read said that that when he threw off his cloak, that maybe the coins that people had given him were also on the cloak, and that those kind of like got thrown to the side too. I think that's a cool image. So
yeah, I think it's interesting too to think about that. Bartimaeus did go and follow Jesus. Immediately kind of reminds me, there are several instances of people who are healed and then immediately give their whole lives to Jesus. That stewardship, giving to the church, is an act of gratitude, rather than a like either perfunctory thing or like a sacrifice, like you're saying. That like when you truly experience the mercy of Jesus,
right, then
it's like an overflowing of gratitude where you're like, okay, well, here you go. Like, rather, in that, you have to kind of focus on that first before you can get to that, like, ease of giving.
Right.
Yes, which, not saying that comes easily to me.
Right,
Just saying that's what I aim for.
It's a goal.
It's a goal, for sure. Yeah. I think, since I'm not tied to a stewardship theme at this time.
If you were not preaching a stewardship sermon, what would you do?
But you could probably, anything could be turned into a stewardship sermon. I think I would focus in on the what do you want question. That was just really striking to me, and thinking about kind of connecting it to prayer, like that prayer is this space for us to come before Jesus, and he asks us, what do you want? And bringing that from the depths of your heart, whether that's healing, a job, whatever it is, like that, bringing that up is the heart of prayer, I guess.
Yeah.
But I also thought about C.S. Lewis, The Weight of Glory, which I can't remember if that's a book or an article or an essay. Have you read that?
I think I have it on the shelf, but I don't think I've...
Yeah, it's a good one. And he talks about how he's sort of talking about the question of what do you want, and that we as humans so often settle for lesser fulfillment of what we want. So like we settle to have a margarita or money or whatever it is, that those aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves, but that they're like faint echoes of what we're actually longing for, which is communion with God. And so I might revisit that essay and draw from that a little bit, and just talk about, how can we kind of mine through the layers of what we want until we get back to what we're actually longing for is Jesus, is, to be healed, to be in the presence of Jesus, to follow him, even though that may first come up as like, I want to be famous, I want to be, like whatever it is. If we drill down, what we're looking for is to be, embraced as children of God.
I like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess there's a lot of things you could do with these readings.
For sure, yeah.
Good luck.
There's readings, and I'm excited to hear your sermon, and thanks so much for being on Steal My Sermon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.